Okay, great. So welcome again. My name is Eileen Corcoran with the Vermont Historical Society, and we're excited to have you today here for our virtual roundtable on communicating with members and donors. Our third winter roundtable, though we have hit spring, so I do appreciate everybody being here with us, even though it's sunny outside. So I do appreciate that, and we hope we'll have some good discussions today. We're going to kick it off with Tori Hart, our Director of Development at VHS. She's going to do a short presentation on kind of what we do at VHS for communications, and especially some of the things that we did this past year as well. So Tori, I am going to kick it off to you.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm going to just share my screen here quickly. It's funny, for as much as I've been doing this, I still have to double check what I'm doing. All right. Let's see. There we go. All right. So as Eileen said, I'm Tori Hart. I'm the Director of Development at the Vermont Historical Society. Just a quick background on me. I have a master's degree in History and Museum Studies from the Cooperstown Graduate Program. And I've been working in fundraising for about 9 years at various Vermont institutions, but I've been at the Vermont Historical Society for the last 5 years. So as Eileen said, I just wanted to kind of give you guys a sense of how we have changed how we've been communicating with our members and donors since COVID started. And then I'd love to hear what you guys are working on with your own societies and museums. So just kind of a brief overview. I wanted to talk to you guys about kind of our immediate response when COVID hit, how we've been working with our board and engaging them in the stewardship process and communications. Some of our programming and how we've been able to communicate member value with that, a communication survey that we recently did, and then some of our key takeaways that I want you guys to have before we jump into some group discussion. So one of the things that we really needed to do off the bat was, as a lot of you guys, is to make sure that our members and donors knew that we were still here, that we were still active in meeting our mission, even though the pandemic had sent us all home. We were still working remotely. And the biggest thing for us was, how do we, tell everybody that? How do we still communicate to folks, even though we're all remote, and especially with a donor base that is mostly 65 plus and not yet online? So the first thing that we really did was kind of established a working group at the organization. Who needed to be involved in communications, making decisions, how did they originate, and what kinds of things that we need to decide to talk about. So there's a group of us, kind of an unofficial group. Me as Director of Development, Eileen, who also manages a lot of our website, and as you know, she sends out our local history e-news. Shayna, who manages our social media marketing and also our general e-news, and then obviously Steve Perkins as our Executive Director. And so the four of us really have kind of set up a process for, how do we decide to respond to current events, especially now with a lot of other things that are happening, certainly when it comes to diversity and inclusion, some of the massive events that are happening right now in the US, and then obviously our response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So that was kind of one of the biggest things that we did, is we just needed to know, how to originate these conversations. Do we wait for somebody to bring it up? How do we bring it up the chain? Do we wait for Steve to say something? And so the four of us kind of work in tandem and, just say like, hey, I think this needs a response. What's the best medium? Is this an email? Is this a statement on our website? Is this a social media post? Do we need to mail something to folks? And then depending on what it is, we've kind of worked through the channels there. So that was new for us to really have this, just given everything that was going on, to start really working together to make sure that we are being very proactive in our communications. So one of the first things that I started working on with a group of folks was making sure that we were still reaching out to our donors. And one of the things that we started doing was doing handwritten notes. As I said, most of our constituency is in the 65 plus range. And certainly at that time, we really wanted to make sure people had a physical mailed piece from us that said, hi, how are you doing? We want you to know that we're here. You can reach out to us. Here's how you can get a hold of us. And we just want to make sure you're doing all right. We really care about you. We couldn't be meeting our mission without you. You're really important to us. Another thing that we started doing was we increased the volume of our e-newsletters, our general e-newsletter, which is kind of just an overview of upcoming events, any current things that we're working on. Kind of highlights a lot of the videos that we're producing lately. We used to send that out only on a monthly basis, and we changed that to a bi-weekly, which, so that we were in touch with people more and that they had, up-to-date active information on how, our members and donors could partake in some of the events that we were starting to roll out. And the last thing that we did was we really wanted to make sure that, people knew that we were accessible. So really, working with our executive director, Steve, to put out updates, any changes, the fact that we were shutting down the Vermont History Museum and the History Center, that we were closing the library, what folks were working on, how they could get in touch with us during that time. And then obviously, as we started reopening last summer, had very strict instructions in there on how we were doing that. So just using multiple channels to make sure that people knew how they could get in touch with us and what we were doing. One of the other things that we really did, and it's not to say that our board wasn't involved in stewardship, but I feel like we really increased their active involvement in this process. We have a fairly significant donor base, and I'm only one person as the director of development. And so really relying on our board members to help reach out to our folks. So one of the things that we did, because the handwritten notes were so well received by people back in the spring, each board member, we have about 25 trustees on our board, was assigned a group of 5 donors for them to really write personal messages to those folks to let them know how they could contact them, kind of gave brief updates on some of the programs that we had going on, any changes to our services. Those were really well received. And so we kept that rolling. The board then wrote personal notes on our holiday cards to that same group of folks so that they had that consistency. And then also the most recent thing that we did is we actually, just sticking with mail right now for this group, but we had them choose I had selected with our executive director 4 of our old Vermont History Journal articles. This is things that we already had, had published. Selected 4 articles that seemed relevant to either, they were about like the 1918 flu epidemic, so they seemed to translate to how we were, today. We had just had that talk on the Buffalo Soldiers, so that was an article about that. And then also we have an upcoming exhibit on the Catamounts. So there was an old article that had talked about the Order of the Pantherites back in Vermont. And so, picked articles that were very relevant to things that we were either doing or talking about, and had those trustees send them a handwritten note and then allowed them to choose which article they wanted to send to their group of donors. So they kind of could say why they had chosen that for them specifically. And so really just increasing that personal engagement with our donors, but using the board to help, make it, what am I trying to say? To help make it more impact. That's the word I'm looking for, so that we were able to increase our impact. So that way I wasn't writing, 150 notes to people, but was, using them and making those personal connections between board members and our donors. And, as you guys have seen, we really delved right into the virtual realm. This past summer alone, we had genealogy workshops. We started promoting collections videos, our home collections care series, our fall cooking class, which is now going to be repeated this spring. Obviously these roundtables, which happened over the winter and now again this spring, and our third Thursday lectures moved remote. And while we have some fee for service now associated with some of these things, the genealogy workshops had a fee attached to them, the home collections care and the spring cooking classes, there's a lot of content that we started putting out into the public realm. which is great and amazing, but we didn't want to leave our members behind in that. So that was a discussion that we had to have internally, which is how can we still communicate membership value as we're putting out more content to the public? So one of the things we started to do was to assign whether these programs would have a free or reduced rate for members, to make sure that that membership value was still captured. So for our genealogy workshops, for instance, there was a fee for non-members, but members were allowed to attend them for free. They have reduced rates for the cooking class series, and then you're still leaving things that are just free for everybody, like our third Thursday lectures. Another thing was, as we keep doing the collections videos, they're released on a bi-weekly schedule right now, is allowing, that's kind of what originated that members corner e-news, which as long as your institution is a member of VHS, you guys should all be receiving those as well, or somebody at your organization should be. Is to preview those videos to members before they're released as part of the public on our social media and our general e-news channels. Then the last thing that we instituted was, which is new, we only released that about a month ago, is our exclusive member resources page, which is kind of a landing page of all the different new content that we have, such as recordings from the workshops that we've been doing. That's a landing page for the collections videos. And it also helps direct you to things that are still member only, which like our Vermont History Journal articles that you can access. It kind of directs you to the portal for those. So that was very important for us to continue to communicate out that membership value as we increased our public programming. And then, as we've been doing this for about a year now and kind of changing the ways in which we've talked to our members and our donors, was to really go back and ask them, is this working for you, what we're doing? Does it make sense for us to send bi-weekly e-newsletters? Is that too frequent? Is that too little? Do you enjoy the content that we're doing in this new special members only e-news? Are you following on us on our social media channels? So we really wanted to, kind of evaluate, that was another piece, after now we've been doing it for a year, we need to evaluate it. So we recently sent out a communication survey, which some of you may or may not have participated in, really just asking about, are their satisfaction with things? What kind of content do our members and donors, are they looking for? Do they enjoy the collections highlights that we put in the history connections newsletter? Are they enjoying the collections videos? What kind of stories are they looking for? And great for us, they came back and they're mostly satisfied with the things that we are doing. But there are a few things that they did pinpoint that they wanted to know more about. Which is, we used to include the events that you guys submit us. As you see, they go out in our local history e-newsletter. But for a little bit, we were also putting them into our general e-newsletter, which has a different list. And so they wanted to know what you guys are doing. That was something that was very important to them, was to see, what's going on in their own towns. So that's something that we're going to be putting back in there. Also more stories and photographs that, directly connect, some of the events that we're living through today with events that happened in the past. And then overall, just more visuals. So as you guys can see, it says, I like hearing what other historical societies are doing, which is great news. So we'll be definitely promoting more of the events that you guys are sending. But overall, folks were satisfied. Another thing that came up out of that too was that we had asked them what other organizations they receive their newsletter content from. I don't have a slide for that here, but a lot of our members and donors are also subscribed to either their own local historical societies newsletter. So if you guys are putting out an e-newsletter, our folks are subscribed to that as well. And they're following a lot of the other cultural organizations in Vermont, like the Vermont Humanities Council, the Vermont Folklife Center, which is great. So certainly that's something to consider. So if you guys have an e-newsletter, our folks are certainly interested in hearing about what you're doing through that medium. And also, if it's not something you're doing, I think that's a good conversation to have. Is that something that you are able to do internally or to promote more of is your own e-newsletter, because our folks are certainly following you on that if you have one. Also, we put out a print newsletter called History Connections. Right now it's being sent out 3 times a year. And what we found is that even though we have all of this online content, our members are still taking the time to read that print newsletter. So that's another piece. So if you guys are sending out a print newsletter, I know our folks are certainly still interested in reading what you have to say through that. 94% of our members who receive it said and took the survey said that they did read it. So that was very important to us as we were looking at, we were debating, are we at the point where we start moving fully into a digital realm? And the answer is no. Our members still want that physical newsletter, that physical journal. They still want to take the time to read that. And then also too, like I said, most of the results were very positive, but there are, we did get some things out of it that we are tweaking. As I said, we're adding back in your events into our general e-newsletter. We are going to be tweaking the design a little bit of our print newsletter. We also realized that because we are now putting so much digital resources up, especially our library, they're working really hard to digitize, to add catalog records from our physical card catalog, that it can often be confusing for folks to figure out the vast, how do they access these resources? Where do they find certain resources? Just because there's such a high volume of things that we've now added to our digital sphere, that we're going to be producing some short videos, how-to videos, because we found also that those short collections videos are very well liked and easily digestible for folks. So we're going to be creating a series of how to find this videos for our library and digital resources to kind of introduce folks to where they can find certain things. And then another piece that we're doing is because we've had such a high takeoff in our amount of digital and virtual programming, is to make sure that we're not forgetting to add that support message to follow up registrations. Just to say, like, this is, these programs are only free or reduced rates thanks to the support of our members and our donors. Please consider making a contribution or joining as a member, especially because we found that about 25% of our folks are not in Vermont. And also too, there seems to be, Amanda can correct me later if I'm wrong, but about 50-50 are members and 50-50 are not. So we're also seeing a lot of folks joining us that are new to our organization and are engaging with us for the first time. So we want to make sure that they know that there is a way to, become more involved with what we're doing and to allow it make it easy for them to access that. So some of the key takeaways I want you guys to have before we start chatting is just, for us, it was really figuring out, who is our constituency? We know that our constituency is very much of the 65 plus. So what communications make the most sense for that group? Where are they engaging with us? And so that's why, even though we're still putting a lot of e-news content out there and we've really increased the amount of virtual offerings, that we are still taking the time to produce our journal that gets sent out twice a year, that we have our print newsletter, and that we also are still taking that time to write personal notes to our folks and to let them know that we appreciate them. So I think that's something for you guys to think about as well. Who is your constituency? Who's your community? How did they find out about what you are doing? And then, continuing to use those channels, make sure you are where the people are. Also, capacity is huge. Certainly we're a small organization, and I know a lot of you guys, a lot of it is volunteer run. So what do you have time to do as well? Are you able to send out an e-newsletter or not? Can you send out a print newsletter? It's important to assess what you can and can't do, and then also, to invest your time and energy in the things that you can do well. Same thing from timing. We found that, our bi-weekly e-news, that seems to be an okay amount for folks. That's not too much for them. Also, we're taking that time to post on our social media channels at least once a day, not usually more than that, but at least once a day. And also to set expectations, especially when we shut down. It was very important to make sure that we had multiple, we'd left instructions as to how people could reach us. Since we didn't have anybody in the office, I know most of our staff members at least switched their voicemail to say that they could be reached and left their email addresses. Same thing with our main line. we made sure we directed them to an inbox that was going to be accessed by somebody, at least in a very, a good time frame, that it wasn't too long between when the box was checked. And I think it's okay to tell people, like, if you guys are shut down for the winter, I think that's fine. Just make sure that you clearly state your hours, either on a voicemail or on an auto reply. I think the biggest thing is just making sure that people know when they can expect to hear from you and to be consistent about it. So that's kind of what I have for you guys today. I'm definitely interested in hearing some of your thoughts, and obviously, of course, happy to answer any questions. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. There we go.
Great, thanks, Tori. So yeah, definitely if anybody has any questions or comments or anything about communicating that they want to start us off on, feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat box.
Here, I'll open up with a question or a comment. I think it might be helpful if we could see maybe one or more of your surveys that you have sent out. I know that your questions would be specific, to the VHS, but perhaps some of those questions are generic that we could transfer into our own surveys.
Oh yeah, no, I completely agree. A lot of it was very generic, and certainly you guys could sub it out with the types of communications that you are already sending out there. I think Eileen and I would be happy to share that report with you guys. Anne is asking whether this presentation will be available for you to share with fellow board members. The answer to that is also yes. Eileen's going to follow up with the recording after we're done, and certainly you guys can send that out to whomever you wish.
Sarah has her hand up. Sarah.
I have a question. Have you found any change in interactions on Facebook as Facebook has become more controversial?
I'm going to default to you on that one, Eileen.
So for us, and we can see what other folks, if they have any experience, Facebook still seems to be holding, I want to say regular or normal for us. It's still our biggest social media channel. We've actually held audience, so we're not losing people. Comment wise, we seem to not get too many sort of troll comments. I know there's a lot of organizations and institutions that have seen that kind of uptick. We don't regularly seem to see that, though again, there's definitely times when, as Tori was talking about, when we may be addressing something that's a little bit more topical, that you get some of those standard, I'll say jerk comments that people just like to put on social media. But we do have a plan. We have a social media response sort of flow chart that sort of helps, and Shana is our main social media person right now, sort of helps her to sort of say, do I need to respond to that? Do I need to delete it? Should I block that person, etc. So yeah, anybody else on sort of on Facebook, especially, I think for that. We don't do a whole lot of Twitter and Instagram. We don't find a lot of comments like that per se.
Amanda's saying also that we've had some folks who have said that they prefer not to watch any of our broadcasts through Facebook Live. And now because we've got everything through Zoom, that's kind of helped with that issue.
Yeah, and we also are now using YouTube more as well a lot. So the nice thing about YouTube, and especially with recordings, is then you can either share directly or you can embed in your own website or something like that. So again, taking it off other platforms. Bonnie.
Hi, I've had pretty good success with Facebook. I try to post on there weekly, sometimes twice a week. And certainly photographs are what attract people. I think I've gotten one negative comment over the last 3 or 4 years. That was not really negative, but just something I didn't respond to. So we've had very good success with Facebook and pulling in new people. And people like it, especially who have moved away from Colchester. And that's a way for them to easily check in and share some of those memories of things about Colchester that they remember and enjoy. I've also been looking at Facebook, Instagram. That's going to be my next thing, because at one of the previous workshops, I heard that that's pretty good in pulling in newer people, younger people. And that's one of the things we're really striving for, to get that interest in.
Great.
And I'd be interested to know if any of you have had good success with recruiting younger people to your organizations.
Yeah, so a question from Dorothy about reaching to a younger audience. Anybody got that?
One thing we did in Colchester was last year, for the very first time, we had a winner at Vermont History Day. So we invited him and his mom for a tour of our building, and gave the winner of the contest a free membership to our organization. Of course, then COVID hit, so he didn't get to come to any meetings, but we did a lot of publicity in the local newspaper, and our local, the town of Colchester has a newsletter that they send out, and they were happy to help promote that. So we're hoping that this year there will be more Colchester kids who participate in Vermont History Day.
Yeah, as Tori mentioned, ours audience is still, again, fairly older. On our communication survey, I believe it was about 76% of respondents were 65 plus. So anybody, who does a good job with younger audiences, please also let us know. So it's definitely one of those things. Question from Mary: were the trustees' handwritten notes sent to high-level donors, and how did you decide which donors to write to, Tori?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Yes, they were sent to higher levels. So basically what I did was I took our donors from the last fiscal year, and then I took, with each trustee taking about 5, I took like the top 125 and I assigned those out to our board members. Certainly wanted to make sure that they were talking to people at that level, and certainly that's where I needed the most help, and also to allow that peer-to-peer talking to, our board of trustees with our highest level donors. And then I also had myself, and then I have a membership and operations associate, and her and I took some of the next level of members. So we kind of just kept going down in the range of amounts of gifts that folks had done it. But also wanted to make sure that we were still communicating. So certainly some of the other things that I just do is that if anybody, all of our annual donors, it's harder to keep up with our annual appeal donors just because there's so many, but if somebody makes a gift online, for instance, I immediately get a note saying they made an online gift, and I try to follow those up with a personal email back, just a small note of thanks as often as I can. Certainly depending on the time of year, that's easier done, but I try to make a personal connection to folks as often as I can.
Cut out at the end.
A question for Tori. Tori, in terms of reaching out to businesses for donations, would it be better to wait another month or more until the climate improves to reach out to these folks? If you ask people at the wrong time, or businesses at the wrong time, is that actually putting you further behind than if you would have waited till the proper time? Or is there a proper time?
Yeah, I would say that's a good question. So I would confess that businesses are not one of our strongest areas of support. It's hard for us because sometimes in a way I think that makes it easier for you guys is because you're so community based. You have the business right in your community that you can reach out to and are able to support and recognize. As for us as a statewide organization, sometimes targeting, I think sometimes it makes it harder for us to really get that support. What I do the best with is usually Wizard Day, just because that does expand the state. I do get some support through that with businesses, and I'll find that some of them, it really depends. Some of them have like quarterly funding areas. Some of them seem to have yearly annual deadlines. So unfortunately, I don't know if there's really a good time, since it seems to vary between folks. But I think also one of the things I've really tried to do more is that you can just reaching out to them directly. Usually their marketing person, I found, seems to handle their donations as well. And if not, they can certainly put you in touch with that person. But I think it's just a conversation. I have been a little wary of wondering, especially with COVID, how our business is doing. But I think it's worth reaching out and asking. I think if they can still support what you guys are doing in the community, I think they want to, be reciprocal. Obviously, our nonprofits have been just as hard hit as the businesses have been. I don't know if that quite answers your question. I don't really have a formula per se. I think it's good to just start the conversation.
And a note and a hand raised from Sarah about younger audiences moving back to us and their comic books and podcast driving tours. I don't know if you want to say anything now, Sarah, or we wait and announce the next sort of little workshop we've got cooking up for that.
We can wait. I was going to well, two things. I'm about to send out our business sponsor requests, and I'm sending it out to everybody.
The Moncton is moving into building a new town hall and moving into it, and our building is on the Federal Registry because it was built in the 1800s, and so we'd like to buy it in the Historical Society, but it's a big leap given the size of the organization and how much that would take. Raising the initial money be easy. It's keeping it going over the long run. And of course, everything's all volunteer. So, but in any case, we don't have, like, the Archaeological Society has more than the Moncton. But I'm trying to post to the Moncton Facebook page, stuff from the Historical Society to try to get younger people involved with it. So, anyways, I'll stop.
No,
Yeah, we definitely found that's, in our communication survey, that the things that people said that they enjoyed the most, as you would hope that people associated with museums would enjoy, is the collection stuff. The videos, pictures of collections, objects, any stories that we can share about them. Certainly our mystery photo and our History Connections newsletter gets some of the most engagement and follow up. Our collections manager writes these really great collections highlights, and people have really enjoyed those, and kind of seeing, that context and then any connections that you can make to now. So certainly for us, we've seen that those photos and those collection stories are what really drives people.
Yeah, and and you've given me a good idea. We have old journals from the Archaeological Society that if we publish synopsis on, in social media from the old ones, and then we're starting up new ones to do the synopsis in the social media would be help to engage. Now, I have an emergency crew. I'm also the volunteer coordinator. And, I've got almost 100 people on the list, on the crew. And it's just a matter of engaging them into different activities because they get very excited when we can do it. Unfortunately, the coronavirus threw a wrench in the whole thing.
So one of the things sort of that brings up, and Tori touched on a little bit and talking about our programming and also our, our communication survey about the audience outside of Vermont now, which is a lot easier to get through the sort of the digital or virtual realm. But I'd be interested to hear how you folks are thinking about. That's great that we're expanding our reach beyond our own sort of tiny community in some fashion, but talking about sort of capacity and consistency as smaller organizations, do you feel that you're going to sort of be able to keep up, I guess, with interacting with people from other areas or who now have more research questions and they live in, Oregon or something like that?
Well, we're hoping, we actually have in September, it's Vermont Archaeology Month. And this year we did a Zoom talks, and we made a call out to anybody to give a talk. And we actually had a guy from Hong Kong give a talk, and he was very good about the technology he was using in Turkey to do his digs. And he says, I know you're probably wondering why I volunteered for the Vermont Archaeological Society. He says, I'm originally from Vermont and I hopefully will get back there someday, but he's out of Hong Kong. So I think it's and even like for us, I'm pushing to give Zoom talks like at least quarterly or every other month and give honorariums. And they're telling me they don't have to be that big. And and keep them on Zoom even after the pandemic, because then people don't have to drive, you know what I mean? And you can get people from all over Vermont to participate and beyond. And so we're trying to set that up and make calls for people, like, to do it. And we're trying to get the guys that found the mammoth bones, to do a talk that are the same age as when humans were supposedly in Vermont, which had been to Vermont at that time. So shows that they're contemporaneous, the mammoths and the humans in Vermont. So in any case, we're moving along to try to get activities. But I think Zoom can be quite a good thing, to give presentations on a regular basis, and a small organization can do that relatively easily.
Our winter Zooms brought in a lot of brought in people from around the country too, mostly people who had used to live in town and had moved or retired, and they were so happy to see their neighbors. And so I'm thinking that we're going to do them in the winter. We did 5 weeks in a row. Thursday nights, it was dinner and a talk. And I think we'll do them again February, March. At that time, people don't want to go out anyway, but I kind of like to cluster programming a little bit. And I think I'm going to keep the Zoom to the winter and try to do more in person at other times of the year.
What kind of Zoom offerings have you been providing over the winter?
We did a series called Discover Norwich. And the idea was that we were going to support the restaurants in town. So it was an honor system where the admission to the program was to buy dinner at a designated restaurant. And we held them at dinner time. And if you didn't want to get dinner, you could donate to the food bank. And it brought in $6,000 to the food bank. And like the restaurants barely could manage to keep up with it all. So it was very popular. And more people showed up than at town meeting.
Wow.
So, but the topics were not historical for the most part. I asked the other nonprofits in town if they would do a presentation, and the goal was the talks had to be about how to get outside and explore and enjoy the community. And I added 20 minutes of history to the front of every single one of those talks. So I forced the history in on all these people who were there actually for porcupines and trails and things like that. And people wrote back and said they loved the history and they wanted more history. So they just didn't know it. So I snuck it in.
Sounds like you got some good ideas going.
Has anybody had trouble just getting information in their local papers? In Shelburne, it was very easy to do some kind of outreach, like historic preservation, or kind of little contests, or identify that detail in the building, or this picture. Do you know what's going on? But now it's like pulling teeth just to get anything, because the space is just taken up with, either general Vermont information, or it's just not specific to town. And because that's one of the best ways still for us to reach out to, especially new members to Shelburne that know nothing about the history. And we want to engage them, those younger families. And it's very difficult. We do use Facebook through, if you grew up in Shelburne, ... But still, that's an older audience, people who've moved away, and they're very interested. I've sold a lot of books that way, but I'm not reaching those younger families, because I've just, the Shelburne News is, just not there for us. Like,
That's part of why I partnered with the other nonprofits, like the Science Center. And we had a lot of young families from, come to the Science Center to learn about porcupine tracks. And then I did a piece around landscape history on the front of it. And that brought in, and then a number of those families joined. And our newspaper, no one was receiving, and it was in the calendar of events, and no one got it from that. They're not even looking at it anymore. It's all the listserv or Front Porch Forum or whatever, but that's how people were getting the information, if not directly from us or from the nonprofit we had partnered with.
I'll give you an example of what happened just this weekend. I had a Boy Scout build us a display cabinet that was beautiful and very hard to build, and with the glass and the woodworking was fantastic. So I tried to get somebody to come and do a article as we're moving it into our space, and no one could come. So I took pictures, gave some basic information. All I got was the picture of just 2 sentences for this young man who put all this time, even through the COVID situation. And so I did put something in Front Porch Forum, and I did get good response, and so then I thought, well, I'll put a letter in the editor. I'll get an editor to the newspaper to get some information about this young man. It was very frustrating. I'll find 3 different ways to do it, but it's very hard to engage young people when we're not, giving them kudos for things and ask them to participate, and then they get nothing back. You really need to acknowledge that.
I learned recently, in case you haven't heard of this, I just learned recently that UVM has a program called the Community News Service. And I only found this out because one of the students work there, and they have usually a mentor at a local newspaper. So the student that called me was actually from Illinois or somewhere, but he somehow got, it must have been on Facebook or something. He heard about the Buffalo Soldiers presentation, and so wanted to do a story about what Colchester Historical Society has been doing and how the COVID pandemic affected us. So he contacted me to do a story, and did a pretty good job. He had a couple of minor errors, but for somebody who wasn't even from around here, it was pretty good. So that's something you might want to get in touch with them. And actually, I think the students themselves started a new newspaper in Winooski, because Winooski hasn't had a paper in a while. The Winooski Eagle went out of business, and I heard that they are now running that newspaper. So it's they don't get paid for it. The students do it, and they have a partner at the local paper that they sort of use as a mentor and that they report to. But they have to do the work, and he interviewed me. He recorded it. He asked me for photographs. He talked with a couple other people on our board. and did a pretty good write-up for the local Colchester Sun. So that program is called the Community News Service through UVM. So I would recommend that you contact them and see if they're hooked up with your Shelburne newspaper or any of your local newspapers, and that might be a foot in the door for students who need that experience. I don't know if they're specifically journalism students or what they're doing, but it was a nice little free piece of PR that I didn't have to do myself. And he did it all on the phone, of course. We didn't meet in person, but between phone and email, we were able to get a pretty good story in the Colchester paper.
Can I say something? I'm from a small town in the southern part of Vermont, and we have a small local school. And we work with the school and the teachers, and they are very good at bringing what we want in history in the town to their school. And they participate with us always on Memorial Day. We'll choose a war period per se, and that kids in the 6th, 7th, 8th grade will participate and look for their ancestors that may have been in that period of war. And on Memorial Day, they will do up papers and bring them to class. And we always invite them to our historical building and take them on tours and try to get them interested. And it's surprising how interested they start and pay attention at that age. And the teachers are very, very good about, and they like that we bring them in and get them interested in the community.
So we're getting close to 1, even though we had a little bit of disruption. Anything else related to sort of communicating with our members or donors that people really want to talk about or mention about what they're doing? I think it's, again, this is always one of those big topics that we could spend days upon days talking about. So. We're good. All right.
Somebody's got their motorcycle outside. I can.
Somebody's out in the sun again. So yeah, if we feel like this is a good stopping point, again, this is a recording, so I'll be sharing that with everybody who registered. I'll probably have to do a little bit of editing here to splice these together. So it might take me a little bit, but we'll also share with that, the slides. We'll share some of our communication survey information for you guys, since that was a request, as well as the chat information that people shared so that everybody can remember that. But we do appreciate hearing from folks and getting a chance to chat. And again, April 15th will be our next roundtable, an add-on that we're going to be talking about reopening museums and programs. So hopefully we'll see where we are in mid-April about if we have any more clarity on where we're going or where we're at or what guidelines are, and just sort of see what everybody's thinking about. Hearing a lot from different organizations about how much they're already planning or not planning or unsure of. And I think it'll be great to talk with each other and see where we're all at, and hopefully feel like maybe we can know what we're doing at least short term. So any other last comments before we say goodbye? All right. Excellent. Thanks again, everybody. Enjoy the day. And stop